The void between stars had never felt so cold to Nathan Cole as it did in that moment, drifting in a salvage pod barely large enough to contain his bruised and battered frame. Through the scratched viewport, he watched the distant pinpricks of light that had once represented hope and possibility, now transformed into markers of territories that wanted him dead. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, a gaunt face bearing the weathered lines of 43 years, most of them spent running from one end of the galaxy to the other. The emergency beacon pulsed its rhythmic signal into the darkness, a lighthouse calling out to shores that might never answer, or worse, might answer with weapons locked and charging. 3 days ago, Nathan had been just another forgotten soul scraping by in the outer rim territories, hauling legitimate cargo between stations that asked no questions and expected none in return. His ship, the Wandering Grace, had been a pre-war freighter held together by determination and replacement parts scavenged from a dozen different vessels. She had not been beautiful, but she had been home for the better part of 15 years, ever since he had walked away from everything he had known and everyone who had known him. That life felt like it belonged to someone else now, a stranger whose memories Nathan carried like stones in his pockets, weighing him down even as he tried to forget their origin. The hegemony had found him at the refueling station orbiting a dying red giant, their cruiser emerging from slipspace with the kind of precision that spoke of intelligence gathering and long-term surveillance. Nathan had barely made it to his ship before the first warning shots crossed his bow, and the chase that followed had pushed the Grace beyond her limits. She had given everything she had, her old engines screaming in protest as he pushed her through gravity wells and asteroid fields, but in the end, the mathematics of pursuit had proven inescapable. When the missile had torn through her engine compartment, Nathan had just enough time to seal himself in the emergency pod before the vacuum claimed the rest of his vessel. Now he floated in the debris field that had once been his home, watching through sensors as the hegemony cruiser picked through the wreckage like a vulture examining carrion. They would find no body in the ruins of the Grace, and that would tell them everything they needed to know. The hunt would continue, and Nathan Cole, the last survivor of the human race, would remain the most wanted being in the known galaxy. The irony was not lost on him that his species had been extinct for over 2 centuries, wiped out in a war that the history books of every major civilization now taught as a cautionary tale. The humans had been too aggressive, too ambitious, too dangerous to be allowed to spread among the stars. The coalition of species that had formed the hegemony had made their decision with cold calculation, and the extermination had been carried out with methodical efficiency. Every colony had been reduced to ash, every ship destroyed, every last man, woman, and child hunted down until the galaxy could breathe easy knowing that the threat of humanity had been eliminated forever. Except they had missed one. Nathan's grandfather had been a deep space explorer, charting systems so far from civilized space that even the most thorough genocide had failed to reach him. By the time he had returned to find his species erased from existence, the war had been over for a decade, and the hegemony had moved on to other concerns. He had lived out his days in hiding, passing his secrets and his warnings to his daughter, who had in turn passed them to Nathan. For 3 generations, the Cole family had survived by becoming invisible, by learning to move through a galaxy that would kill them on sight if they ever revealed their true nature. Nathan had been careful. He had worn the prosthetics that reshaped his features into something passably Kolari, had undergone the gene therapy that masked his human biosignature, had learned to speak and move and think like the species around him. For 15 years, he had been nothing more than a minor trader with a forgettable face and an unremarkable history. But somewhere, somehow, someone had learned the truth, and now 500 warships were converging on this sector of space, with orders to ensure that humanity's extinction was finally complete. 500 warships for one man. The thought might have been flattering if it was not so terrifying. Nathan understood why they were afraid, of course. The histories that painted humanity as monsters were not entirely fabrications. His species had been capable of terrible things, had waged wars of conquest and committed atrocities that still echoed through the collective memory of 100 civilizations. But they had also been capable of love, of sacrifice, of art and music, and all the things that made existence worthwhile. The galaxy had chosen to remember only the darkness, and Nathan supposed he could not entirely blame them. Fear was a powerful motivator, and the fear of humanity's return had kept the hegemony united for 200 years. The pod's life support systems beeped a warning, reminding him that he had perhaps 6 hours of breathable air remaining. The emergency beacon would either save him or doom him, depending on who arrived first. If a merchant vessel happened upon his signal, he might be able to talk his way to safety. If the hegemony intercepted it, his long flight would finally be over. Nathan closed his eyes and tried to find some peace in the uncertainty, tried to remember the meditation techniques his mother had taught him before the sickness had taken her. But peace was elusive, scattered by the adrenaline still coursing through his system, and the knowledge that every passing moment brought him closer to discovery. The sensor ping came without warning, a sharp tone that cut through the silence of the pod like a knife. Nathan's eyes snapped open, his hand moving instinctively toward the small plasma pistol he kept holstered at his hip. Through the viewport, he watched as a ship emerged from the debris field, its silhouette unlike anything he had ever seen. Where hegemony vessels were all sharp angles and aggressive profiles, this craft was smooth and organic, its hull seeming to flow like liquid metal frozen in mid-motion. It moved with impossible grace, threading through the wreckage without a single collision, and Nathan felt something stir in the depths of his memory, something old and half-forgotten that whispered of ancient legends and impossible hope. The ship stopped before his pod, hanging in space with patient stillness, and a voice emerged from his emergency receiver, speaking in a language that no living being had heard for 200 years. It spoke in English in the tongue of Earth, and the words it said reached into Nathan's chest and squeezed his heart with the grip of destiny long delayed. Human life sign detected. Identity confirmation required. State your name and lineage. Nathan's throat was dry, his voice cracking as he responded to the impossible transmission. Nathan Cole, son of Maria Cole, grandson of Samuel Cole of the exploration vessel Pioneer's Dream. The silence that followed seemed to stretch into eternity, each second weighted with the accumulated hope and despair of generations. Then the voice returned, and there was something almost like emotion in its synthesized tones, something that sounded remarkably like relief. Lineage confirmed. Welcome home, descendant. I am the Guardian, the last of the Sentinels constructed by the United Earth Defense Force. I have been waiting for you for 217 years. The airlock opened on the Guardian's hull, and Nathan Cole, the last human in the galaxy, flew toward a future he had never dared imagine. Behind him, the hegemony cruiser continued its futile search through the wreckage, unaware that the prey they sought was about to become something far more dangerous than a frightened survivor. The legend that the galaxy had tried so hard to kill was about to remember who it truly was. The interior of the Guardian was a museum and a mausoleum in equal measure. As Nathan drifted through the airlock and into the cavernous docking bay, his feet touched down on a deck that had last felt human footsteps when his grandfather was still a young man charting unknown stars. The lights activated at his presence, illuminating rows of fighter craft that sat in perfect preservation, their hulls gleaming with the care of automated maintenance systems that had continued their work long after their creators had turned to dust. Each vessel bore the insignia of the United Earth Defense Force, a stylized eagle clutching a planet in its talons, a symbol that Nathan knew only from the faded photographs his grandmother had kept hidden in a lockbox beneath her bed. Please proceed to the bridge, the Guardian's voice instructed, warm and almost maternal in its tone. There is much to discuss and little time in which to discuss it. The hegemony vessels hunting you will complete their sweep of the debris field within 4.7 hours. After that, they will expand their search pattern and may detect my presence. Nathan walked through corridors that felt hauntingly familiar, as if the genetic memory of his species had somehow prepared him for this moment. The walls were lined with displays showing images of Earth as it had been before the war, blue oceans and green continents and clouds swirling in patterns that no living human had ever seen with their own eyes. He paused before a memorial wall, names etched in letters of gold, thousands upon thousands of them, and understood without being told that these were the dead, the lost, the sacrificed. They fought, the Guardian explained, sensing his attention. Even when they knew they could not win, they fought. The final battle lasted 17 days, 93 vessels of the defense force against a fleet of over 4,000 hegemony warships. When it was over, Earth herself had been shattered, but the enemy had paid for their victory with the blood of millions. I was not present for that battle. My mission was different. The bridge was smaller than Nathan had expected, designed for efficiency rather than grandeur. A single command chair sat at its center, surrounded by holographic displays that activated as he entered, presenting him with more information than he could process in a lifetime. Tactical readouts, star charts, weapon systems, shield harmonics, and at the center of it all, a single flashing icon that represented the combined might of the hegemony fleet now hunting him across the stars. 517 vessels, the Guardian reported. 17 have joined the pursuit since your escape from the refueling station. The hegemony is taking no chances. They have committed a significant portion of their third fleet to your elimination. Nathan sank into the command chair, feeling it mold itself to his body with technology 2 centuries more advanced than anything he had encountered in his travels. And what exactly am I supposed to do about that? You are one ship, however impressive you might be. You cannot fight 500 warships. Incorrect, the Guardian replied, and there was something almost like amusement in its voice. I am not one ship. I am one ship that survived 200 years of technological advancement. I am one ship that was designed specifically to counter everything the hegemony could throw at humanity. I am one ship that contains weapon systems they have never seen and defenses they cannot penetrate. And most importantly, I am one ship that has been studying their tactics, their communications, and their weaknesses for 2 centuries while I waited for a human to command me. The displays shifted, showing battle projections and probability calculations. Nathan watched as the Guardian laid out scenario after scenario, each one ending with the hegemony fleet in ruins and the single human vessel emerging victorious. The numbers seemed impossible, the projections fantastical, but the artificial intelligence presented them with the confidence of absolute certainty. You are asking me to fight, Nathan said slowly, to stop running and turn around and face them. I am asking you to be human, the Guardian replied. Your species was not defined by your capacity for violence, whatever the hegemony might claim. You were defined by your refusal to accept the impossible, your determination to overcome any obstacle, your absolute conviction that the universe could be shaped by will alone. 500 ships stand between you and freedom. The humans I served would have looked at those odds and laughed. Nathan thought of his mother, wasting away in the back room of a mining station, refusing treatment that might have revealed her nature. He thought of his grandmother, teaching him the old languages and the old songs, keeping alive a culture that the galaxy had tried to murder. He thought of his grandfather, returning to find his world burned and his people gone, choosing to survive when survival seemed pointless. They had all fought in their own ways, all refused to let humanity die, and now the burden of their legacy rested on his shoulders alone. If I do this, he said quietly, if I fight them and somehow survive, what then? I'm still one man. I cannot rebuild a species. You are not the only survivor, the Guardian revealed, and Nathan's heart stopped in his chest. In the final days of the war, the Defense Force scattered hundreds of cryogenic vessels to the farthest reaches of the galaxy. Hidden stations, buried colonies, frozen passengers waiting for the day when it would be safe to wake. I have been monitoring their signals for 200 years, protecting them from discovery, waiting for a human who could lead them. You are that human, Nathan Cole. You are the spark that can rekindle the flame. The magnitude of what the Guardian was telling him crashed over Nathan like a wave. He had spent his entire life believing he was the last, carrying the weight of extinction on his back, and now he learned that somewhere in the darkness between stars, thousands of his people slept, waiting for someone to wake them. The fear that had defined his existence began to transform into something else, something fierce and bright and dangerous. "Show me," he said, and his voice was steady now. "Show me everything." The Guardian obliged, and for the next 3 hours, Nathan received an education in the true history of humanity's final war. He learned that the genocide had not been the result of alien hatred, but of alien fear, a terror so profound that entire civilizations had united to destroy a species that had existed for barely 2 centuries among the stars. He learned of the weapons humanity had created, not just the planet killers and the reality bombs that the hegemony used to justify their actions, but also the wonders, the generation ships and the terraforming engines and the dimensional bridges that had promised to make the universe itself humanity's garden. He learned of the Sentinels, the 12 great warships that had been humanity's answer to the combined fleets of the hegemony. Each one had been a mobile fortress, crewed by thousands and armed with weapons that could shatter moons and tear holes in the fabric of space. The Guardian had been the youngest of them, launched only months before the final battle, ordered to flee to the outer darkness and wait for a future that might never come. Its siblings had all died defending Earth, their cores overloading in final acts of defiance that had lit the sky with new stars. When the education was complete, Nathan sat in silence for a long moment, processing the weight of what he had learned. The hegemony had not killed humanity out of evil but out of fear, and in doing so, they had proven that the fear was justified. They had created the very thing they sought to destroy, a human who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. "The fleet hunting me," he said finally. "If we destroy them, the hegemony will send more. They will not stop until they have erased every trace of humanity from the galaxy." "Correct," the Guardian agreed. "Which is why we will not merely destroy the fleet. We will break the hegemony itself." The battle plan that appeared on the holographic displays was audacious to the point of madness. The Guardian proposed not just engagement but complete psychological warfare, using the mythological terror the hegemony felt toward humanity as a weapon more powerful than any cannon or missile. They would strike not at the ships themselves but at the minds of those who crewed them, rekindling the ancient fears that had led to the genocide and turning them into chains that would bind the enemy's hands. "The hegemony believes humanity to be monsters," the Guardian explained. "We will show them monsters, not because we are cruel, but because fear is a more effective weapon than any in my arsenal. When the galaxy sees what one human can do, they will understand that extinction was never possible. They will realize that every shadow might hide another survivor, every empty system might contain a hidden fleet, every peaceful traitor might be the last soldier of a war that never truly ended." Nathan understood the strategy, even as a part of him recoiled from it. He had spent his entire life trying to prove that humanity was more than the stories told about them, trying to demonstrate through his own quiet existence that his species had been capable of gentleness and peace. Now he was being asked to become the nightmare, to embrace the role of monster in service of a greater good. It felt like a betrayal of everything he had believed, and yet he could see no other path forward. "There will be survivors," he said. "When we fight, when we win, there will be those who escape to tell the tale." "That is essential," the Guardian confirmed. "The story they tell will spread across the galaxy faster than any fleet could travel. By the time the hegemony can mount a proper response, we will have vanished into the darkness, only to appear again where they least expect us. We will become a legend, Nathan Cole, and legends cannot be killed by warships." The decision, when it came, felt less like a choice than an acceptance of fate. Nathan had been running his entire life, hiding from a galaxy that wanted him dead, pretending to be something he was not. In this moment, seated in the command chair of a ship that had waited 2 centuries for his arrival, he finally understood that running had never been an option. The hegemony would never stop hunting him, would never allow humanity to exist even as a single survivor, would never rest until the fear that drove them had been satisfied. "Let them come," Nathan said, and his voice carried the weight of generations. "Let them bring their 500 ships and their terror and their righteous conviction. They think they are hunting the last remnant of a dead species. Let us show them that humanity has never truly died." The Guardian's engines hummed to life, power systems that had slumbered for 200 years, awakening with the fury of a sun. Weapon arrays extended from hidden compartments, shields initialized with frequencies the hegemony had never encountered, and targeting systems locked onto the distant signatures of the hunting fleet. Nathan felt the ship around him respond to his presence, recognizing him not just as a passenger but as a commander, the first human to sit in this chair since the day it was built. "Shall I broadcast the traditional human challenge?" the Guardian asked, and there was something almost like eagerness in its synthesized voice. Nathan smiled, the expression feeling strange on a face that had not known genuine joy in longer than he could remember. "What is the traditional human challenge?" The records indicate that human commanders would often hail their enemies before battle, offering them the chance to surrender or withdraw. The message was typically brief and to the point. "Then yes," Nathan said. "Let them hear it. Let them know what is coming for them." The Guardian's communications array powered up, broadcasting on every frequency the hegemony used, cutting through encryption and jamming with technology 2 centuries more advanced than anything they possessed. Across 500 warships, alarm klaxons began to sound as sensors detected a signal that should have been impossible, a transmission in a language that had been dead for longer than most of the crew had been alive. "Attention hegemony fleet," Nathan spoke, and his voice was calm and steady, carrying across the void with the weight of extinction and the promise of resurrection. "This is Nathan Cole of the human species, aboard the Sentinel-class warship Guardian. You have hunted me across the galaxy, seeking to finish what you started 200 years ago. I am here to inform you that the hunt is over. You may withdraw now, and I will allow you to leave in peace. Continue your pursuit, and I will remind the galaxy why you feared us in the first place." The silence that followed the transmission lasted exactly 12 seconds, long enough for the message to propagate across the fleet and for the commanders to process what they had heard. Then the response came, a fury of acceleration as 500 warships abandoned their search patterns and converged on the single point of light that had dared to challenge them. Nathan watched them come on the tactical display, a tide of metal and fire rushing toward him with the accumulated hatred of 2 centuries. He should have been afraid. By any rational measure, he should have been terrified. But as the Guardian's weapons charged and the first targeting locks were established, he felt only a profound and overwhelming sense of rightness, as if his entire life had been leading to this single moment. "They are not withdrawing," the Guardian observed, its tone almost conversational. "I did not expect them to," Nathan replied. "But history will record that I gave them the chance." The battle that followed would be studied by military strategists for generations to come, analyzed and debated and ultimately declared impossible by those who had not witnessed it. The Guardian moved through the hegemony fleet like a ghost, its shields absorbing fire that should have vaporized any vessel in existence, its weapons striking with precision that bordered on prescience. Nathan gave orders with an instinct he had not known he possessed, as if the spirits of all the human commanders who had come before were guiding his hands and his thoughts. The first cruiser died in a flash of light, so bright it temporarily blinded every sensor in the system. The second followed seconds later, and then the third and fourth and fifth, the Guardian carving through the fleet like a blade through paper. The hegemony commanders tried to adapt, tried to fall back on tactics that had served them for centuries, but everything they knew had been studied and countered during the Guardian's long vigil. Every maneuver was anticipated, every strategy neutralized, every attempt at coordination disrupted by jamming so sophisticated that the fleet began to fight itself in the confusion. 20 minutes into the engagement, the first vessels began to flee. Their commanders had seen enough, understood that they faced not a battle but an execution, and the ancient terror that had driven their ancestors to genocide now drove them to abandon their posts and run for the safety of deep space. Nathan let them go, watching as escape pods and retreating destroyers scattered in every direction, carrying with them stories that would spread like wildfire across the hegemony's vast territory. The flagship was the last to fall. Admiral Vex Corinth, the hegemony's most decorated commander, refused to retreat even as his vessel burned around him. Nathan watched the ship's death throes on the display, watched as its reactor began to overload and its crew abandoned their posts, and felt a moment of genuine respect for the alien who had chosen to die rather than face the shame of defeat. "The Admiral is still aboard," the Guardian reported. "His bridge crew has evacuated, but he remains at his command station." Nathan made a decision that would define the new era of human-galactic relations more than any battle ever could. Open a channel to his ship, direct communication commander to commander. The alien's face appeared on the display, a creature of scales and sharp angles, its eyes burning with hatred and something that might have been resignation. "Human," Corinth spat, the word carrying 2 centuries of cultural weight. "Come to gloat over your victory." "I came to offer you a choice," Nathan replied. "Your ship is dying. In approximately 4 minutes, the reactor will breach and everyone still aboard will cease to exist. You can stay and die with your vessel, or you can evacuate and live to tell the tale of what happened here." "And why would a human show mercy to those who destroyed his people?" Nathan leaned forward, his eyes meeting the Admiral's across the void of space. "Because mercy is what separates us from the monsters you believe us to be. Your ancestors tried to exterminate my species out of fear. I am offering you your life because I am not afraid. Go, tell your masters what you saw here. Tell them that humanity has returned and that we will not be the nightmares they remember. We will be something far more dangerous. We will be the truth." The Admiral stared at him for a long moment, something shifting behind those alien eyes. Then, without a word, he turned and walked toward the escape pods, leaving his dying ship behind. Nathan watched him go, understanding that the story Corinth would tell would do more to reshape the galaxy than any fleet could ever accomplish. The battlefield fell silent, littered with the wreckage of what had once been the mightiest fleet in the sector. The Guardian drifted through the debris, its sensors cataloging the damage, its repair systems already beginning the work of restoring it to full capability. Nathan sat in the command chair, exhausted in a way that went beyond physical fatigue, and tried to process what he had just done. He had killed today. He had taken lives, hundreds of them, beings who had families and dreams and futures that would now never come to pass. The weight of it settled on his shoulders like a shroud, and he understood that this burden would never truly lift, that every life he took in the battles to come would add to the toll he carried. "You are experiencing moral distress," the Guardian observed. "This is normal for human commanders following their first engagement." "Is it?" Nathan asked, his voice hollow. The capacity for empathy, even toward enemies, was considered one of humanity's defining characteristics. "The commanders I served before the war often struggled with the same feelings you now experience. They understood that war is sometimes necessary to protect what you love, but they never allowed themselves to forget the cost." Nathan closed his eyes, remembering his mother's face, his grandmother's songs, his grandfather's stories of a blue planet circling a yellow star. He thought of the sleepers hidden throughout the galaxy, thousands of his people waiting to be awakened, trusting that someone would come for them. He thought of the future that might be possible if he could somehow navigate the chaos that lay ahead. "Where do we go now?" he asked finally. "The nearest cryogenic vessel is 17 days away at maximum slipspace velocity. It contains approximately 2,000 sleepers, including several individuals with military and governmental experience who may be of assistance in the challenges ahead." 2,000. The number seemed impossibly large and vanishingly small at the same time. 2,000 humans, alive and waiting, preserved through 2 centuries of darkness for a moment that was finally arriving. Nathan felt tears prick at his eyes, the first he had shed in years, and did not try to hold them back. "Set a course," he said. "It is time to bring them home." The Guardian's engines powered up, and the ship that had waited 200 years for this moment turned toward the stars. Behind them, the wreckage of the hegemony fleet drifted in silent testament to the day's events. Ahead, scattered across a galaxy that had tried and failed to murder them, the children of Earth slumbered in their frozen cocoons, dreaming of a world they would never see again and a future they could not imagine. The story of Nathan Cole's stand would spread across the hegemony like wildfire. In bars and trading posts and government halls, beings of 100 species would whisper of the single human who had destroyed 500 warships, who had appeared from nowhere and vanished just as quickly, who had offered mercy when none was expected and promised truth when lies would have served. Some would dismiss it as propaganda or exaggeration. Others would remember the old fears and begin to wonder if the genocide had been a mistake. And in the darkness between stars, the Guardian carried its human commander toward the first of many reunions, toward the beginning of a resurrection that the galaxy had never believed possible. The legend that the hegemony had tried so hard to kill was waking up, and nothing would ever be the same again. 17 days later, the Guardian emerged from slipspace in a system that had no name on any galactic chart. The star was old and red, its light barely sufficient to warm the handful of rocky planets that orbited in lazy ellipses around its dying core. There was nothing here that would attract attention, no resources worth mining, no strategic value that would draw military interest. It was, in short, the perfect hiding place for something that was never meant to be found. The cryogenic vessel is designated Sleeper Station Gamma, the Guardian reported. It was launched 6 months before the fall of Earth, carrying refugees from the European and African territories. Current population is 1,947 souls, all in stable hibernation. Nathan stared at the sensor readings, at the small station hidden among the asteroids of the system's outer belt, and felt his heart hammering against his ribs. Nearly 2,000 people, sleeping for over 200 years, unaware that the world they had fled was gone and the species they had left behind had been erased from existence. They would wake to a universe that had changed beyond recognition, to news that would shatter everything they had believed about their place in the cosmos. "How do I tell them?" he asked, the question directed at himself as much as the ship. The station's AI should have protocols for the awakening process. I recommend allowing it to handle the initial revival and orientation. The psychological shock of emerging from cryosleep is significant enough without additional revelations. The docking procedure was automated, the Guardian systems interfacing with the ancient station through protocols that had not been used since before Nathan's grandfather was born. He walked through the airlock with the weight of responsibility pressing down on his shoulders, knowing that the people who slept in these walls would look to him for leadership, for answers, for hope in a hopeless situation. The station's AI introduced itself as Mother, a maternal acronym for a system designed to nurture its charges through centuries of frozen darkness. Its voice was warm and comforting, the kind of voice that would have reassured frightened colonists as they said goodbye to everything they had ever known. "Welcome, Commander Cole," Mother said. "I have been monitoring galactic communications for the past 2 centuries. I know what has happened to our species, and I know why you have come." "Then you know why I need them," Nathan replied. "I do, and I believe they will answer. The people who boarded this station were not cowards. They were survivors, individuals selected specifically for their resilience and adaptability. They knew the risks when they agreed to the sleep, understood that they might wake to find everything changed. Give them time to grieve, Commander. Allow them to mourn what has been lost, and then show them what can be built from the ashes." The awakening took 3 days. Nathan watched from the observation deck as pod after pod opened, as men and women and children took their first breaths in over 2 centuries, as the truth of their situation slowly filtered through to minds still foggy from the long sleep. There were tears and screams and silent stares of incomprehension. There was anger directed at the universe and at God and at Nathan himself, as if he were somehow responsible for the tragedy that had befallen them. There was grief so profound it seemed to physically weigh down those who bore it. but there was also determination. Nathan saw it first in the eyes of a woman named Linda Martinez, a former military officer who had been among the first to wake. She listened to his explanation of what had happened, processed the reality of humanity's near extinction, and then squared her shoulders and asked what she could do to help. Others followed her example. A doctor named Kevin Brooks began organizing medical teams to assist with the awakening process. An engineer named Patricia Yang started assessing the station's systems and determining what could be salvaged for the journey ahead. A child psychologist named Danny Kim took responsibility for the youngest survivors, shielding them from the worst of the revelations while helping them understand their new reality. One by one, the survivors of Sleeper Station Gamma chose to face the future rather than surrender to despair. And as Nathan watched them come together, watched them begin to organize and plan and hope, he felt something shift in his own heart. For the first time in his life, he was not alone. For the first time, the burden of humanity's survival was shared across shoulders far broader than his own. "You are not what I expected," Linda Martinez told him one evening, as they reviewed the Guardian's sensor data in the station's cramped command center. "The stories we heard before the sleep made it sound like only the military and the government knew about the cryogenic program. I did not expect our leader to be a traitor from the outer rim." "I am not a leader," Nathan replied. "I am just the one who happened to be here. That is what leaders always say." Linda smiled, and for a moment she looked less like a hardened soldier and more like someone who remembered what it meant to hope. "You survived. You found the Guardian. You defeated the hegemony fleet that was hunting you, and now you are waking us from our sleep and asking us to help rebuild everything we lost. If that is not leadership, I do not know what is." Nathan had no response to that, so he changed the subject. "The Guardian has identified 27 other sleeper stations scattered throughout the galaxy. If we can reach them all, we will have a population of nearly 40,000 humans. That is enough to establish a sustainable community, assuming we can find a safe place to settle." "Nowhere is safe," Linda observed. "The hegemony controls most of the galaxy, and after what you did to their fleet, they will be more determined than ever to find and destroy us. Then we do not hide. We build strength until the hegemony understands that the cost of destroying us is higher than the cost of accepting our existence." The plan that emerged over the following weeks was ambitious, audacious, and possibly insane. The awakened humans of Sleeper Station Gamma would become the core of a new human civilization, one built not on conquest but on survival, not on aggression but on the simple determination to exist in a galaxy that had tried to erase them. They would gather the other sleeper stations. They would salvage technology from the ruins of the old human worlds, and they would create something new from the ashes of what had been lost. But first, they would need allies. The hegemony was not a monolithic entity, but a collection of species and factions bound together by shared fear and mutual interest. If those bonds could be weakened, if the fear that had driven the genocide could be transformed into something else, then perhaps humanity could find a place in the galaxy without having to fight for every inch of ground. The Korathi were the first species to make contact. They were traders and diplomats, their civilization built on the principles of negotiation and mutual benefit, and they had always been uncomfortable with the hegemony's decision to exterminate humanity. A Korathi merchant vessel arrived at the edge of the system 3 weeks after the awakening, its captain requesting permission to approach and parley. Nathan met the Korathi captain, a being named Tess Voren, in the Guardian's conference room. She was unlike any alien he had encountered during his years as a trader, her body a graceful combination of avian and mammalian features, her eyes holding an intelligence that seemed to see through to the core of whoever she observed. "You are not what we expected," Tess Voren said, echoing Linda's words from weeks before. "The stories paint your species as savage conquerors, beings incapable of reason or diplomacy. You do not seem savage to me." "We were many things," Nathan replied carefully. "We were capable of great cruelty and great kindness, of terrible destruction and remarkable creation. We were not perfect, but we did not deserve extinction. Few do. The Korathi merchant leaned back in her chair, her feathered crest flattening in what Nathan recognized as a gesture of contemplation. The hegemony made their decision out of fear, and fear is a poor foundation for policy. Many of us have regretted that decision, though few would dare to say so publicly. And yet you came here. You sought us out, because the galaxy is changing. Tess Voren's eyes met his, and Nathan saw something in them that might have been hope. Your victory over the Third Fleet has sent shockwaves through every major power. The hegemony is fracturing, its member species questioning whether the alliance that drove your people to extinction is still serving their interests. There are those of us who believe a different path is possible. A path that includes humanity. A path that includes everyone willing to build rather than destroy. The Korathi Merchant Collective would like to propose a trade agreement between our peoples. Nothing official, nothing that would draw the hegemony's attention, but a beginning. A foundation on which greater things might be built. Nathan looked at the alien merchant, at the outstretched hand that represented not just trade goods and diplomatic niceties, but the first step toward a future where humanity might exist without constant fear. He thought of all the species that had participated in the genocide, of the hatred and terror that had driven them to murder billions, and wondered if such wounds could ever truly heal. But he also thought of his mother's teachings, of the stories she had told him about Earth and the people who had lived there. They had not been saints, those ancient humans. They had made terrible mistakes and committed terrible crimes. But they had also learned and grown and changed, building societies that strove, however imperfectly, toward justice and peace. If humanity could change, perhaps the galaxy could as well. Tell me about the Korathi Merchant Collective, Nathan said. Tell me what kind of future you want to build. The conversation lasted hours, and when it was over, humanity had its first ally in a galaxy that had tried to murder them all. It was a small step, a tiny crack in the wall of hostility that surrounded the survivors, but it was a beginning. And beginnings, Nathan was learning, were sometimes all that was needed. The months that followed were a blur of activity. The Guardian led expeditions to one sleeper station after another, its human crew growing with each successful awakening. By the end of the first year, they had gathered nearly 15,000 survivors from stations scattered across the galaxy, a population that seemed almost impossibly large to Nathan after a lifetime of solitude. They found more than just survivors. Hidden caches of pre-war technology, manufacturing facilities preserved in perfect stasis, libraries containing the accumulated knowledge of a civilization that had been erased. The humans began to rebuild, slowly and carefully, establishing hidden colonies in systems too remote or too barren to attract hegemony attention. The hegemony did not remain idle. They sent fleets to hunt the human survivors, dispatched assassins to eliminate their leaders, launched propaganda campaigns painting them as the monsters of ancient legend returning to threaten galactic civilization. But the fear that had once united the hegemony was now working against them. Species that had cooperated in the genocide began to question whether it had been the right choice. Factions within the alliance started to see humanity not as a threat to be eliminated, but as a potential partner in building a new galactic order. The turning point came in the third year, when a hegemony battle group cornered a human evacuation convoy near the galactic core. The battle should have been a massacre, but before the hegemony could fire a single shot, ships from the Korathi Collective and 3 other species intervened, positioning themselves between the human vessels and the attacking fleet. The Korathi Merchant Collective hereby declares its protection of the human survivors. Tess Voren's voice rang out across every frequency. Any attack on these vessels will be considered an act of war against the Collective and its allies. The hegemony commander hesitated, calculating the odds and the implications. The Korathi alone were not powerful enough to challenge the hegemony, but they were not alone. Other species were watching, waiting to see how this confrontation resolved. If the hegemony fired on the Korathi, they might win this battle but lose allies whose support was essential to maintaining their power. The hegemony fleet withdrew. For the first time since the genocide, humanity had been protected by the very galaxy that had tried to destroy them. Nathan stood on the bridge of the Guardian, watching the hostile fleet retreat, and felt something shift in his chest. It was not joy exactly. Too many had died for joy. But it was hope, genuine and uncompromised hope that the future he had scarcely dared to imagine might actually be possible. "You did this," Linda Martinez said quietly, standing beside him. "3 years ago you were one man running for his life. Now you have given us a future." "We did this," Nathan corrected her. "All of us. Everyone who refused to give up, who chose to fight and build and hope. I was just the spark. You are the fire." The work was far from over. The hegemony still controlled most of the galaxy, still viewed humanity as a threat to be eliminated, still commanded resources far beyond anything the survivors could match. But the balance was shifting. The fear that had driven the genocide was being replaced, slowly but inexorably, by something new: curiosity, respect, the beginnings of understanding between species that had once seen each other only as enemies. 5 years after his escape from the hunting fleet, Nathan Cole stood before a gathering of representatives from 12 species, the first formal diplomatic summit between humanity and the galactic community since the war. He was older now, his hair streaked with gray, and his face lined with the weight of everything he had carried. But his eyes still burned with the same determination that had driven him to stop running and start fighting. 200 years ago, he said, his voice carrying across the assembled delegates, your ancestors made a decision that nearly erased my species from existence. They did this out of fear, out of the belief that humanity could not be allowed to survive. I am not here to blame you for that decision. I am not here to demand vengeance or reparation. I am here to offer you something that no one believed was possible. He paused, looking around the chamber at faces that represented civilizations older than humanity had ever been, species that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires across millennia of galactic history. Some looked at him with hostility, others with curiosity, still others with the cautious hope that the last 5 years had begun to nurture. I am here to offer you peace, Nathan continued. Not the peace of submission, not the peace of one species surrendering to another, but the peace of equals standing together to face the challenges of a vast and indifferent universe. Humanity has learned from its mistakes. We know the darkness we are capable of, and we have chosen to walk a different path. All we ask is the chance to prove it. The response was not immediate. Such things never were in the slow grind of galactic politics. But seeds had been planted, conversations begun, and the future that had seemed impossible just a few years before was now taking shape on the horizon. Humanity had been hunted. Humanity had been nearly destroyed. But humanity had also survived, adapted, and found a way to rise again. And as Nathan Cole looked out at the gathering of species that had once been enemies and were now something closer to neighbors, he understood that this was only the beginning of the story. The legend that the galaxy had tried to kill was not just awake. It was alive and growing, and ready to write a new chapter in the history of the cosmos. The humans had returned, and this time they would not be erased. This time, they would help build something that no genocide could ever destroy. This time, they would prove that even the forgotten could be remembered, and even the legends that sleep in darkness can awaken to a brighter dawn. And somewhere in the void between stars, the Guardian hummed with quiet satisfaction, its mission finally complete. It had waited 200 years for a human to command it, and Nathan Cole had proven worthy of that trust. The Sentinel had kept its vigil, and now the future it had protected was finally beginning to unfold. The galaxy had hunted one human with 500 warships. They had failed, and in their failure they had awakened something far more dangerous than any single ship or soldier. They had awakened hope. The end.